The meeting started at 9:03 a.m., 3 minutes late because the projector wouldn't connect. And I remember that detail because it gave me just enough time to notice the folder in my boss's hand. It was mine. Not literally, not something with my name on it, but I knew the color, the tab structure, even the slightly bent corner on the back page. I had put that together 2 nights earlier at my kitchen table after reworking the numbers for the third time. I hadn't shared it widely yet. Just one email, sent to him directly, marked draft. He didn't look at me when he walked in. That was the first thing that felt off. Normally he'd nod, maybe make a quick joke about coffee or deadlines, something casual. That morning, he went straight to the head of the table, set the folder down, and started talking about the projector like it was the only thing that mattered. I sat halfway down the table, close enough to see the pages when he opened the folder, far enough that I couldn't interrupt without making it obvious. "Let's just get started," he said finally, giving up on the projector. "I'll walk you through the proposal." Proposal. That word settled in my stomach in a way I didn't like. I hadn't called it that. In my email, I'd written initial concept and needs review. I was careful about that kind of language. He wasn't. He flipped the folder open, and there it was. The structure, the headings, even the phrasing in the executive summary. Not similar, not inspired by, exactly the same. "This is something I've been developing over the past few weeks," he said, tapping the first page with a pen. And I didn't react right away. It took a second for my brain to catch up to what I was hearing. A few weeks. I looked around the table. No one else seemed surprised. People were nodding, taking notes, doing that polite listening thing you do in meetings when your mind is only half there. He kept going, outlining the core idea, streamlining the client onboarding process by shifting part of the workload to an automated system. He used the same example I had written, even the same numbers. I had spent hours pulling those from old reports, making sure they were accurate. At one point he paused and said, "The key insight here is reducing friction at the initial touch point." That was my sentence. I remembered typing it, deleting it, and then typing it again because it sounded a little too polished, but also right. I felt this strange mix of heat and stillness. My face got warm, but the rest of me went very calm. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry in the way I expected to be. It was more like everything had narrowed down to a single, clear understanding. He was presenting my idea as his. Not by accident. Not because he forgot where it came from. He had the file. He had my words. He had just decided, somewhere between my email and this meeting, that it was now his work. I thought about speaking up, just saying something simple like, "That's from the draft I sent you." It wouldn't even have to be confrontational, just a correction. But I didn't. Instead, I watched. He moved through the sections quickly, like he was familiar but not deeply. He skipped one of the data tables entirely, the one I had struggled with the most. Yet he didn't mention the limitations I had outlined or the risks. Of course he didn't. Those parts made it less clean, less impressive. Someone across the table asked, "How would this affect turnaround time in the first quarter?" He hesitated. Just for a second, I noticed it. I don't think anyone else did. "Well," he said, flipping a page, "based on the projections, we're looking at a reduction of about 15%. That wasn't what I had written. I had written 8 to 12%, with a note explaining that anything higher would depend on factors we couldn't control yet. He went with 15. I sat back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. My heart was beating faster now, but my thoughts were still steady. He didn't fully understand the idea. He understood enough to present it, enough to make it sound good in a meeting. Yeah, but not enough to answer detailed questions, not enough to deal with what would come after this. And that changed something for me. If he had taken the idea and made it better, if he had built on it or even just acknowledged it in passing, maybe I would have reacted differently. Maybe I would have felt angry, or hurt, or compelled to say something right then. But this was different. He had taken something unfinished, stripped out the caution, and turned it into a pitch. Another question came. What about integration with the current system? Would that require additional resources? He nodded immediately. Minimal. We can handle most of it internally. Again, not what I had written. I had flagged that as a potential issue, something that might require outside support depending on how the pilot went. Yet I could feel the gap widening between what I had actually created and what he was presenting. And I realized, sitting there in that too-cold conference room with the broken projector and the hum of the air conditioning in the background, that I didn't need to interrupt him. Not yet. Because every time he simplified something, every time he answered too quickly or too confidently, he was setting a version of the idea in motion that I knew wouldn't hold up. The meeting went on for another 20 minutes. By the end, people seemed impressed. There were a few follow-up questions, some discussion about timelines, and then it wrapped up with the usual, let's circle back kind of closing. He closed the folder and finally looked at me. Good discussion, he said, like I had just been another person in the room. I nodded. Yeah, I said. It was. My voice sounded normal, steady. He didn't linger. He picked up the folder and left, already moving on to whatever came next in his day. I stayed in my chair for a moment after everyone else had started filing out. I could hear bits of conversation, people talking about the proposal, using his name, referring to it as his initiative. I stood up slowly, gathered my things, and walked back to my desk. My email was still open on my screen, the one I had sent him. The timestamp was there, the attachment still sitting in the thread. I looked at it for a long time, then I closed it. I didn't forward it. I didn't reply. I didn't do anything. Not because I didn't care, but because I had just realized something that made all the difference. He had taken my idea, but he hadn't taken the part that mattered most. I didn't go after him that morning. That was the first decision I made, and I made it quietly, without fully explaining it to myself. I just knew that chasing him down the hallway or knocking on his office door right after the meeting would turn it into something immediate and emotional, and I wasn't ready for that. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. So I sat at my desk and did my normal work. Answered emails, updated a spreadsheet, took a call from a client who was more concerned about timelines than anything else. From the outside, nothing had changed, but underneath, everything felt slightly off, like I was watching the day happen instead of being inside it. Around 10:30, my coworker Tunde leaned over the divider between our desks. "That was a solid presentation," he said. "Didn't know he'd been working on something like that." I looked up at him. Tunde wasn't the kind of person who paid close attention to office politics. He showed up, did his work, left on time. He wasn't trying to get a reaction out of me. "Yeah," I said. "Me neither." He nodded, like that was enough, and went back to his screen. That was the second thing I noticed. No one connected me to it, not even by accident. And that made sense. I had only sent it to one person, my boss, Chinedu. No group email, no shared folder, nothing that would create a visible trail unless someone went looking for it. I had trusted the process. Or maybe I had just assumed that was how things worked. Chinedu had been my manager for a little over a year. When I first joined the team, he was one of the reasons I felt comfortable taking the job. He was organized, direct, and seemed to actually care about results more than appearances. At least, that's how he came across in the beginning. He had a way of speaking in meetings that made people listen. Not loud, not aggressive, just confident. Like he had already thought through every angle before he said anything out loud. I had respected that. And for the most part, working with him had been straightforward. He gave feedback when it was needed, stayed out of the way when things were on track. There were no obvious red flags, Nothing that would make you think, this is someone who would take credit for your work. If anything, he had encouraged me to be more proactive. Don't wait for assignments, he told me once during a one-on-one. If you see something that can be improved, bring it to me. That conversation stuck with me. It's part of why I started working on the onboarding idea in the first place. It hadn't come from nowhere. It was built out of small frustrations that had been piling up for months, clients getting stuck in the early stages, delays that didn't have clear explanations, internal handoffs that took longer than they should. I had been tracking those issues quietly, keeping notes, pulling data when I had time. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it was easier than dealing with the same problems over and over again. The idea itself wasn't complicated. It was just structured in a way that made sense. When I finally put it together into a document, it felt unfinished but solid enough to share. That's why I sent it to him late Tuesday night, around 11:40 p.m. I remember the exact time because I hesitated before hitting send. I even reread the email twice. Hi Chinedu, I've been working on an initial concept to improve onboarding efficiency. Still in draft form, but I'd appreciate your thoughts when you have time. That was it. No urgency, no expectation that it would turn into anything immediately. He replied the next morning at 8:12 a.m. Got it. We'll take a look. Short, normal, nothing unusual, and then nothing else until the meeting. By noon, the office had settled back into its usual rhythm. The meeting was already fading into background noise for most people, just another item in a long list of things to follow up on. For me, it was still sitting right at the front of my mind. I opened the document again on my computer, scrolling through each section slowly. I wasn't reading it for the content anymore. I already knew what it said. I was looking at it differently now, almost like I was checking my own memory against what had happened. The headings were the same. The sequence was the same. Even the formatting, bullet points, spacing had been carried over exactly. There was no room for doubt. Around 1:15, I saw an internal email come through to the team. Subject, Onboarding Optimization Initiative, sent by Chinedu. I opened it immediately. He summarized the proposal in a few paragraphs, attaching the same document, now labeled Version 1.0. He outlined next steps, assigned a couple of people to support implementation, and set a tentative timeline for a pilot phase. My name wasn't in it. Not in the summary, not in the list of contributors. Nowhere. I read the email twice, then a third time, slower. It wasn't just that he had presented the idea. He was formalizing it, turning it into something official, something that would move forward under his name. That's when the situation stopped feeling temporary. This wasn't a one-time thing in a meeting. This was going to become part of the team's work, part of the company's process. And if it succeeded, it would be tied to him. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a few seconds. There were a few different ways I could handle it. I could reply to the email, politely pointing out that the document originated from my draft. I could go to HR, escalate it formally. I could confront him directly, ask for an explanation. All of those options were there, clear and straightforward. But each one depended on the same assumption, that I needed to prove something right now. And I kept coming back to the same thought I had during the meeting. He didn't fully understand what he had taken. At 2 p.m., there was a smaller follow-up discussion scheduled with just a few team members, the ones he had assigned to help move things forward. My name wasn't on that invite either. I didn't ask to be included. Instead, I kept working, letting the day move forward, watching how things started to unfold without me in the room. Because by that point, I wasn't just thinking about what he had done. I was starting to think about what would happen next. The first time he tried to pull me into it directly was the next morning. He came by my desk around 9:20, coffee in hand, like nothing had changed. He didn't sit down, just stood slightly to the side, the way people do when they're trying to keep something casual. "Hey," he said. "Quick thing." I turned in my chair. "Sure." "We're moving ahead with that onboarding idea," he said, lowering his voice just a little. "I might need your help pulling some of the back-end numbers together. You've worked with that data before, right?" I looked at him for a second longer than usual. Not enough to make it obvious, but enough that he noticed. "Yeah," I said. "I have." "Good," he nodded. "I'll send you what we need." What we need. Not what I had already done. Not even a reference to the document I had sent him. Just a vague request, positioned like he was delegating a small piece of a larger plan. "Okay," I said. He gave a quick smile, like that settled it, and walked off. That was the first clear shift. In the meeting, he had taken the idea. In the email, he had formalized it. But this was different. Now he was trying to use me to support it, without acknowledging where it came from. And he was doing it carefully, not asking too much, not giving too much detail, just enough to keep me involved, but not enough to give me ownership. Around 10 o'clock, his email came through. Subject, data points for onboarding model. I opened it. He had listed a few metrics he needed: client intake times, conversion rates, average delays between steps. All things I had already included in the document. But the way he phrased it made it seem like these were new requests, like the groundwork hadn't been done yet. "Let me know what you can pull together by end of week," he wrote. I stared at the screen for a while. Then I opened my original file. Everything he was asking for was already there, structured, explained, with notes on limitations and edge cases. If I sent him that again, cleanly, he could just keep moving forward without ever needing to admit anything. So I didn't. Instead, I replied, "I'll take a look and get back to you. No attachment, no reference to the existing work." That was the moment I made a decision I didn't fully articulate, but I followed it anyway. If he wanted to run with the idea, he would have to actually run it, not just repeat what I had written. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. By midday, I started hearing bits of feedback from people who had been in the smaller follow-up meeting the day before. Mostly second-hand comments, nothing formal. He's pushing for a pretty aggressive timeline. Not sure how the integration part is going to work. I think leadership likes it, though. That last one wasn't surprising. On paper, the idea sounded clean, efficient, easy to support in a meeting. It was only when you started getting into the details that things became less certain. Around 1:30, I ran into Ada in the break room. She had been included in the follow-up meeting. She poured water into a mug, then glanced at me. "You're not on the onboarding project?" I shook my head. "Doesn't look like it." She frowned slightly. "That's odd. It feels like something you'd normally be involved in." I shrugged. Guess he has a plan. She studied my face for a second like she was trying to read something, then let it go. "Well," she said, "it's moving fast. Maybe too fast." "How so?" I asked. She leaned against the counter. "He wants to start a pilot in 3 weeks. I didn't respond right away. 3 weeks was unrealistic. Not impossible, but only if everything lined up perfectly. And even then, it would be tight. "Did he go over the risks?" I asked. Ada shook her head. "Not really, it was more about the upside." That made sense. "Okay," I said. She gave a small nod, like she had expected that answer, and left it there. Back at my desk, I opened a blank document and started pulling data. Not everything, just fragments. Enough to respond to his request, but not enough to rebuild the full picture for him. I left out the notes about variability. I didn't include the scenarios where the system might fail. I kept it clean, simple, and incomplete. By the time I sent it to him around 4:45, it looked like a rough starting point. Exactly what he had asked for. A few minutes later, he replied, "Perfect. This helps." Of course it did. It helped him maintain the version of the idea he had already started presenting. The next day, things got more noticeable. He started referencing the project more openly in conversations, calling it our onboarding initiative when speaking to others, but never in a way that included me directly. In a team huddle, he said, "We're working on something that should significantly reduce intake delays." Someone asked, "Who's involved?" He listed names, not mine. I stood there listening, hands in my pockets, keeping my expression neutral. No one questioned it. Why would they? From their perspective, everything lined up. He introduced the idea. He was leading it. He had a team assigned. There was no visible gap. Later that afternoon, he stopped by my desk again. "Those numbers you sent, can you refine the projections a bit?" he asked. "Maybe make them more optimistic." There was a pause after that last word. More optimistic. I looked up at him. "In what way?" "Just tighten the range," he said. "Make the impact clearer." "Meaning, make it sound better." I nodded slowly. "I can look at it." "Great," he said. "We'll need it for the next update." He walked off before I could say anything else. I turned back to my screen, staring at the spreadsheet I had been working on. That was the second shift. It wasn't just about taking the idea anymore. Now he was shaping it into something else, something cleaner, easier to sell, and he expected me to help him do it. Quietly, without question, without recognition. And that's when it became completely clear to me what he was counting on. He thought I would go along with it. That I would adjust, contribute, fill in the gaps, because that's what I had always done, because it was easier than pushing back, because it kept things smooth. I closed the spreadsheet and leaned back in my chair. For a long time, I had been focused on making the work better, fixing problems, improving systems, making things run more efficiently. But now, for the first time since this started, I shifted my focus. Not to the idea, not to the project, to him. And more importantly, to the version of the project he was building without fully understanding it.